The phone rang at 11:37 on Wednesday night, and I knew something was wrong before I even answered. My mother, Carol, never called this late. I was sitting in my Denver apartment wrapping the vintage pearl necklace I'd bought for her 60th birthday party when her voice cut through the silence like broken glass. "Heidi, don't come tomorrow. Madison needs to be the only daughter there for the photos and family presentation." My hands froze around the gift box. 20 years of trying to be the perfect daughter. 20 years of competing for scraps of attention since she married Frank, and now this. The betrayal hit me like ice water in my chest. I stared at my phone for a full minute after Mom hung up the dial tone buzzing in my ear like angry wasps. The pearl necklace sat half-wrapped on my coffee table, mocking me with its careful tissue paper and silver ribbon. I'd spent 3 weeks finding the perfect gift, remembering how she used to admire Grandma's pearls before they disappeared after Dad died. That was 24 years ago. I was 8 when cancer took my father, David, leaving me and Mom to figure out life together. For 4 years, it was just us against the world. She'd make pancakes every Saturday morning while I sat on the kitchen counter, and we'd plan adventures we couldn't afford. Those were the good years before Frank Morrison entered our lives with his expensive suits and promises of security. Mom met Frank at the bank where she worked as a teller. He was this successful real estate developer who swept in like a fairy tale prince, offering to rescue us from our tiny apartment and my secondhand clothes. I was 12 when they married, old enough to feel the shift but too young to understand it. Suddenly, we lived in Frank's sprawling house in Cherry Hills Village with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers that made everything echo. That's when Madison appeared. Frank's daughter from his first marriage, spoiled and bratty at 8 years old with blonde curls and a way of making every adult in the room fall over themselves to please her. While I tried to blend into the background, Madison commanded attention like she was born to it. She'd throw tantrums that somehow became my fault, break things that I'd get blamed for not watching her carefully enough. Mom started changing almost immediately. The woman who used to defend me against playground bullies now told me to be understanding when Madison cut up my homework or borrowed my things without asking. When I complained I was being difficult or jealous. Frank would pat my head and call me kiddo while lavishing Madison with expensive gifts and weekend trips that I somehow never got invited on. High school was a blur of trying to be perfect enough to earn back Mom's attention. I maintained a 4.0 GPA, worked part-time at the local bookstore, volunteered at the animal shelter. I thought if I could just prove I was worthy, she'd remember she loved me first. Meanwhile, Madison coasted through private school on Frank's donations and Mom's excuses for every missed assignment or disciplinary problem. College was my escape. I earned a full scholarship to University of Colorado, studied marketing, graduated summa cum laude. I built a successful career at a digital marketing firm, bought my own condo, traveled to 12 countries. Every achievement felt like placing a stone in a wall between me and the pain of never being enough. But I kept trying. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day, I showed up with perfect gifts and forced smiles. I organized family dinners that Madison would skip last minute. I sent flowers for no reason and called every week, even when the conversations felt stilted and brief. I told myself things would get better, that eventually Mom would see how hard I was trying. The worst part was how subtle it all became. Frank never said anything directly cruel. Mom never explicitly chose Madison over me. It was death by 1,000 tiny cuts. Madison's graduation photos displayed prominently while mine sat in a drawer. Frank remembering Madison's birthday with elaborate parties while mine passed with a card delivered 3 days late. Mom lighting up when Madison called but sounding distracted when I did the same. Last month, I'd spent hours researching the perfect venue for Mom's 60th birthday. I made reservations at her favorite restaurant, coordinated with her book club friends, ordered a custom cake from the bakery where she used to take me as a child. I was so proud of myself for finally doing something right, something that would make her happy. Then I found the voicemail I'd somehow missed from 3 days ago. Mom's voice bright and cheerful, talking to someone in the background. Oh, Heidi's too busy with work to help with party planning. You know how career-focused she is? It's better this way. Madison has such wonderful ideas for decorations. My chest tightened as the realization hit. She'd been telling people I wasn't involved, making me look selfish and uncaring to the extended family. While I'd been secretly organizing everything to surprise her, she'd been painting me as the absent daughter who couldn't be bothered with family celebrations. I'd been erased from my own mother's birthday party before tonight's phone call even happened. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I called in sick to work something I'd never done for personal reasons and sat in my car outside Frank's house by 10 a.m. The circular driveway was already filling with catering vans and flower delivery trucks. Through the tall windows, I could see people hanging streamers and arranging tables. My mother's 60th birthday party was happening without me, just as she'd demanded, but I couldn't stay away. 20 years of being pushed aside had built up like pressure in a steam engine, and something inside me needed to witness this final rejection firsthand. I parked across the street behind a moving truck and watched the preparations unfold. The house looked like something from a magazine, all pristine white columns and manicured gardens. Frank had insisted on buying it when I was 14, claiming we needed more space for entertaining. Really, it was about impressing his business associates and giving Madison a princess castle worthy of her imagined royalty. Around noon, guests started arriving. I recognized some faces from years of awkward family gatherings. Aunt Diane from Mom's side looking uncomfortable in her best dress. Several women from Mom's book club chattering excitedly as they carried wrapped gifts. Frank's business partners with their perfectly groomed wives and expensive handbags. Then I saw her. Mom stepped onto the front porch wearing the navy blue dress I'd helped her pick out last month when she'd still been pretending I was invited. She looked beautiful and happy, hugging guests with genuine warmth. For a moment, my heart ached with missing her the way you miss someone who died, even when they're standing right in front of you. Madison appeared next, stunning in a rose gold dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She linked arms with Mom, possessively playing the devoted daughter role to perfection. They posed for photos with guests all smiles and laughter, the picture of mother-daughter bliss. I felt like a ghost watching my own funeral. The breaking point came when Frank tapped his champagne glass and called for attention. The crowd gathered on the patio while I crept closer, hidden behind the neighbor's hedge like some kind of stalker. But I had to hear this. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate my beautiful wife Carol's milestone birthday." Frank's voice boomed across the yard. She's been blessed with such a wonderful daughter who organized this entire celebration. He put his arm around Madison, who beamed and waved like she'd just won an Oscar. Madison worked so hard to make this day perfect for her mother. The crowd applauded while my stomach dropped through the earth. Madison had done nothing except show up in an expensive dress, but she was getting credit for weeks of planning I'd done in secret. Mom glowed with pride, looking at Madison like she'd hung the moon. But it got worse, much worse. During the dinner portion, I managed to slip closer to the patio doors, hidden by the shadow of an ornamental tree. Frank stood again this time, more serious, addressing what looked like his business associates. "Many of you have asked about family, about legacy," he said, gesturing toward Mom and Madison. "I'm proud to say my wife Carol and our daughter Madison represent everything I value about family, loyalty, and dedication." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Madison is our beloved child, and she'll carry on our family name with honor." Our beloved child, singular, not children, child. One of the guests, an older man I didn't recognize, raised his glass. "It's wonderful to see such a close-knit family. Carol, you must be so proud of your daughter." "Oh, I am," Mom replied, her voice carrying clearly across the evening air. "Madison is everything I could have hoped for in a child." The words hit me like physical blows. In front of 30 people, including family friends who'd known me since childhood, my mother had just erased my existence entirely. I wasn't away on business or unable to attend. I simply didn't exist. I pressed my back against the rough bark of the tree, fighting the urge to either scream or vomit. This wasn't just about tonight's exclusion. This was about rewriting history, creating a narrative where I'd never been born, never spent years trying to earn love that was apparently never available to me. As the evening progressed, I heard variations of the same theme. Madison introduced as Carol's daughter, with no mention of a sister. Stories about our family that edited out 2 decades of my presence. References to Madison as Carol's only child that went uncorrected by either Mom or Frank. The most devastating moment came near the end of the evening. I was preparing to leave, my heart thoroughly shattered, when I overheard Mom and Frank talking quietly on the side porch, thinking they were alone. "The transition is going better than expected," Frank said in a low voice. "Your family has accepted Madison completely." "It feels right," Mom replied. "Like this is how it was always supposed to be. Madison is my real daughter in every way that matters." Frank's next words made my blood run cold. "The lawyer will have the final papers ready next month. Once we complete the inheritance restructuring, Madison will be our sole beneficiary. Carol, this is the right choice for our real family." "I know," Mom said. "Heidi has her career, her own life. She doesn't need us anymore. Madison is the one who truly belongs here." They were planning to cut me out completely, not just from parties or family photos, but from any legal recognition that I'd ever been Carol's daughter. This birthday exclusion wasn't a moment of favoritism or poor judgment. It was the first step in erasing me entirely from their lives. I drove home through tears so thick I could barely see the road, my heart breaking and reforming into something harder, angrier, and infinitely more determined. Friday morning brought clarity along with my rage. I'd spent the night researching Colorado inheritance laws and elder abuse statutes, and what I'd learned made my blood boil. Frank's behavior fit a textbook pattern of financial exploitation, but I needed proof before anyone would take me seriously. The opportunity came when Madison posted on social media about spending the weekend at her friend's lake house in Vail. Frank had a standing golf game every Saturday morning, which meant Mom would be alone for at least 3 hours. I still had my key from the years I'd lived there, kept as a symbol of belonging that now felt like evidence of my naivety. I felt like a burglar approaching my childhood home, but desperation overrode shame. Mom answered the door in her gardening clothes soil under her fingernails and confusion in her eyes. "Heidi, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk about yesterday," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "About why you didn't want me at your party." Something flickered across her face, guilt maybe, or embarrassment. "Oh, honey, it wasn't personal. Frank thought it would be simpler with just immediate family, and Madison had worked so hard on the planning. The lie came so easily, I almost believed she'd convinced herself it was true. Mom, I planned that party. I made the reservations, ordered the cake coordinated with your friends." Her brow furrowed. "No, that was Madison. She showed me all the receipts." My heart sank. Frank had been covering the paper trail, making it look like Madison had done the work while taking credit for my efforts. But this also meant there were documents in the house, evidence of the deception. "Can I use the bathroom?" I asked already, heading toward the hallway. "Of course, dear." Instead of the bathroom, I slipped into Frank's home office. The room always smelled like leather and expensive cologne, filled with mahogany furniture and awards from various business organizations. His desk was locked, but I remembered him hiding the key in the fake book on the shelf, the one labeled Tax Law for Dummies. Inside the desk drawers, I found a treasure trove of financial documents that made my stomach turn. Bank statements showing regular transfers from Mom's accounts to Madison's. Insurance papers with Madison listed as the primary beneficiary on policies Mom had taken out. Property deeds with Frank's name gradually replacing Mom's on assets she'd owned independently. But the worst discovery was in the bottom drawer. A folder labeled Estate Planning contained documents that outlined a systematic plan to transfer Mom's entire inheritance from my father to Madison. The house, the life insurance money, even Dad's veteran benefits had been redirected through a series of legal maneuvers that looked legitimate on the surface, but felt deeply wrong. Then I found the smoking gun, a life insurance document supposedly signed by my father, transferring his $25,000 policy to Frank's management for family investment purposes. The signature looked right, but the date was wrong. According to this paper, Dad had signed it 3 months after he died. Frank had forged my father's signature to steal money that was meant for my education. For 20 years, while I'd worked multiple jobs and taken out student loans, Frank had been spending the money my father had left to secure my future. My hands shook as I photographed every document with my phone. Bank statements showing Frank moving Mom's money into accounts she couldn't access, legal papers giving him power of attorney over her finances, investment records showing him using her assets for his own business ventures. The pattern was clear and calculated. Frank wasn't just favoring his biological daughter over me. He was systematically stealing from my mother while isolating her from anyone who might question his control. I was replacing the documents when I heard the front door slam. Frank's voice echoed through the house 40 minutes earlier than expected. "Carol, whose car is in the driveway?" My heart hammered against my ribs as I quickly locked the desk and replaced the fake book. Footsteps were heading toward the office. I looked around frantically, then dove behind the heavy curtains just as the door opened. Frank entered alone, muttering under his breath about nosy neighbors. He went directly to the desk, unlocking it with practiced efficiency. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice anything out of place. He pulled out a cell phone I'd never seen before, one that wasn't his usual iPhone. The conversation that followed made my blood freeze. "Patricia, it's me. We need to accelerate the timeline. Someone's been asking questions about Carol's finances." Patricia, I didn't know any Patricia, but Frank's tone was intimate, familiar. "No, she doesn't suspect anything yet, but her daughter showed up today. Not Madison, the other one. We need to complete the property transfer before she gets curious." The other one. That's how he referred to me. Not by name, not as his stepdaughter, but as a problem to be managed. "The house sale can close next month if we push it through. Carol signed the papers thinking they were insurance updates. She'll never know it's gone until after the fact, and by then Madison will have legal ownership." He was selling Mom's house, the house my father had bought where I'd grown up, where Mom had lived for over 30 years. He was stealing it right out from under her while she trusted him completely. "Don't worry about the daughter. She's been out of the picture for years. Even if she makes noise, who's going to believe her over us?" The call ended and Frank locked the phone back in the desk. After he left, I waited 10 more minutes before emerging from behind the curtains, my mind racing with implications. Frank wasn't just manipulating our family dynamics. He was committing fraud on a massive scale, and he had an accomplice named Patricia. I had evidence now, but I also had something more dangerous. I had the truth about who Frank really was and why he'd worked so hard to turn Mom against me. I wasn't just an inconvenient reminder of her first marriage. I was a threat to his criminal enterprise, the only person who might notice what he was doing to her. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "It was so nice to see you today, honey. I hope you understand about yesterday." I stared at the message, feeling the last of my childhood illusions crumble. My mother wasn't evil or cruel. She was a victim as trapped by Frank's manipulation as I was. The difference was that she couldn't see the cage he'd built around her, while I finally understood exactly how the locks worked. The war wasn't just for Mom's love anymore. It was for her freedom, her safety, and possibly her life. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Frank's smug face and heard him dismissing me as the other one. But anger had crystallized into something more focused determination. If Frank thought I'd quietly disappear while he destroyed my mother's life, he'd severely underestimated David Miller's daughter. Saturday morning, I started my research in earnest. Frank Morrison's business empire looked impressive from the outside, but public records told a different story. His real estate company had been involved in several lawsuits over the past decade, mostly from elderly clients who claimed they'd been defrauded. The cases had all been settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements, which meant no criminal charges, but a clear pattern of targeting vulnerable seniors. More disturbing was his personal history. Frank had been married twice before Carol, and both marriages had ended in divorce, with his ex-wives claiming financial abuse. The court records were sealed, but the basic facts were available. Both women had lost significant assets during the divorce proceedings, alleging that Frank had hidden money and manipulated legal documents. I found Patricia through a property records search. Patricia Morrison, Frank's first ex-wife, lived in a modest apartment in Lakewood. According to the divorce decree, she'd lost the house, the vacation property, and most of their joint investments when their marriage ended 15 years ago. The same thing had happened to Linda Morrison, wife number 2, 7 years later. Both women had tried to fight back through the courts and lost. Both had been left with almost nothing after decades of marriage to a man they'd trusted completely. Both had signed non-disclosure agreements that prevented them from talking about Frank's methods publicly. But they could talk to me privately, especially if it meant stopping him from doing the same thing to another woman. I found Patricia's phone number through a reverse directory and called her Saturday afternoon, my heart pounding. Hello. Hi, is this Patricia Morrison? I'm calling about Frank Morrison. He's married to my mother, and I think she's in danger. There was a long silence, then a sharp intake of breath. Oh, honey, what's your name? Heidi Miller. My mom is Carol. How long have they been married? 20 years. Another pause. Then we're already too late for prevention, but maybe not too late for rescue. Can you meet me today? 2 hours later, I sat across from Patricia in a coffee shop in downtown Lakewood. She was in her early 60s, well-dressed but tired-looking, with intelligent eyes that held years of hard-won wisdom. She listened intently as I described the past week's revelations, occasionally nodding like she'd heard it all before. Frank has a system, Patricia explained when I finished. He targets recently widowed women with assets, usually through their workplace or social connections. His charming romantic offers security and stability. The woman falls in love with the fantasy of being rescued. That's exactly what happened with Mom. Phase 2 is isolation, she continued. He gradually cuts her off from family and friends who might question his influence. He creates conflict between the woman and her existing relationships, then positions himself as the only person who truly understands her. My chest tightened. He turned her against me. Phase 3 is financial control. He convinces her to consolidate accounts, sign papers, make investments. Everything looks legitimate, but gradually he gains access to her assets while limiting hers to his. By the time she realizes what's happening, if she ever does, everything is legally tied up in ways that favor him. What happened to you? Patricia's laugh was bitter. I tried to fight back when I discovered he was stealing from my elderly mother's trust fund. Frank had convinced me to give him power of attorney over her finances when she developed dementia. He stole nearly $200,000 before I caught on. Did you report it? Of course. But Frank had covered his tracks beautifully. Every transaction looked legitimate on paper. He had documentation showing my mother had consented to the investments. When I tried to prove otherwise, he sued me for harassment and filed a restraining order. His lawyers were better than mine, and he'd been planning his defense for years. The non-disclosure agreement was my only way out of a legal battle that would have bankrupted me completely. I lost my house, my savings, my mother's inheritance, and my reputation. Frank made sure I looked like a vindictive ex-wife making false accusations. My phone buzzed with a text message. Patricia glanced at it and froze. Linda Morrison wants to know if she can join us. I texted her when you called. Frank's second wife, former wife, and she has information you need to hear. Linda arrived 20 minutes later, younger than Patricia, but carrying the same wounded wariness. She slid into our booth and immediately began talking like she'd been rehearsing this conversation for years. He did it again, didn't he? She said without preamble. Found another widow with money and convinced her he was Prince Charming. I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Patricia told me about the forged insurance documents. That was his specialty with me, too. Frank is an expert at recreating dead people's signatures. He forged my first husband's will to make it look like he'd left everything to Frank in trust for my care. How is that legal? It's not, but proving forgery is nearly impossible unless you have the original documents for comparison. Frank always makes sure the originals disappear. Patricia leaned forward. Linda and I have been documenting Frank's pattern for years, trying to find a way to stop him. We've identified at least 3 other women he's targeted, but they're all bound by non-disclosure agreements or too embarrassed to come forward. Why didn't you go to the police? We tried, Linda said, but Frank is careful to operate within legal gray areas. Elder abuse is hard to prove when the victim doesn't believe they're being abused. And Frank is excellent at making his wives believe everything is their idea. Your mother thinks she's protecting Madison by cutting you out, doesn't she? Patricia asked gently. The tears I'd been holding back for days finally spilled over. She told him I didn't need them anymore, that Madison was her real daughter. Classic Frank, Linda muttered. He makes them think they're being good mothers by choosing his child over their own. My daughter stopped speaking to me for 3 years because Frank convinced me she was trying to steal from me. How did you get your daughter back? By getting away from Frank and accepting that I'd been brainwashed. It took 2 years of therapy to understand how he'd manipulated my thinking. Patricia pulled out a thick folder. We've been waiting for an opportunity like this. Someone with access to Frank's current operation. Someone with proof of his methods. What are you proposing? A coordinated intervention. Linda and I have resources now, legal contacts, evidence from our own experiences. If your mother is facing imminent financial danger, we might be able to get protective services involved. Based on what I overheard yesterday, he's planning to sell her house next month without her knowledge. Patricia and Linda exchanged a significant look. That's criminal fraud, Patricia said. If we can prove he's forged documents or manipulated her into signing papers, she doesn't understand we have grounds for criminal charges. But we need more evidence, Linda added, and we need to get your mother to safety before Frank realizes we're on to him. I wiped my eyes, feeling something like hope for the first time in days. What do you need me to do? First, we contact my brother Robert, Patricia said. He's a retired federal investigator who specializes in financial crimes against seniors. He's been wanting to build a case against Frank for years. Second, we need to document everything happening in that house. Frank's phone calls, financial transactions, any pressure he's putting on your mother. Third, Linda concluded, we need to find a way to get your mother away from Frank long enough to show her the truth about what he's been doing. As we planned our strategy, I felt the weight of 20 years lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't the difficult daughter making trouble over nothing. I was part of a team of women who understood exactly what Frank was and how he operated. For the first time since that devastating phone call, I felt like I might actually be able to save my mother, and maybe save our relationship too. Sunday morning brought an unexpected ally. Patricia's brother Robert called me at 7 a.m., his gravelly voice carrying the authority of 30 years in federal law enforcement. Patricia filled me in on your situation, he said without preamble. I've been tracking Frank Morrison for 6 years, waiting for enough evidence to build a solid case. What you've found might be exactly what we need. 6 years. Frank Morrison isn't his real name. He's actually Franklin Morris, wanted in Arizona for elder fraud under the alias Frank Morrison. Before that, he was Francis Marin in Nevada. Same crimes. This man is a professional predator who's been systematically destroying families for over 2 decades. My heart hammered against my ribs. Are you saying my stepfather is a fugitive? I'm saying your stepfather is a career criminal who's gotten very good at staying 1 step ahead of law enforcement. The challenge with men like Frank is that their victims often don't realize they've been victimized until years later, if ever. By then, he's moved on to the next target. What about my mother? Based on what Patricia described, your mother is in immediate danger. If Frank is planning to sell her property without her knowledge, he's probably preparing to disappear with the assets. That's his usual pattern when he senses heat. Robert explained that elder financial abuse was one of the fastest growing crimes in America, but also one of the hardest to prosecute. Victims like Mom often defended their abusers, either out of embarrassment or because they'd been psychologically manipulated to believe they were willing participants. The good news is that forgery is a felony we can prove with the right evidence. If Frank has been faking signatures on legal documents, we can arrest him. But we need to move fast. We arranged to meet that afternoon at Patricia's apartment, where Robert laid out a plan that made me feel like I was entering a spy novel. The goal was to gather irrefutable evidence of Frank's crimes while ensuring Mom's safety during the confrontation. Frank travels for business frequently. Robert noted consulting a file that seemed surprisingly thick. His pattern is to complete major financial transfers right before leaving town, giving him an escape window if anyone discovers what he's done. I called Mom that evening, forcing my voice to sound casual. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. How was your weekend?" "Oh, quiet. Frank's leaving for a business conference in Phoenix on Wednesday. He'll be gone for 4 days, which is unusual for him." Phoenix, where Franklin Morris was wanted for fraud. My stomach dropped. That sounds like a long trip for business. "Yes, but he says this client is very important. Something about expanding his investment portfolio." After hanging up, I immediately called Robert. "Frank's leaving for Phoenix on Wednesday. That's not a coincidence, is it?" "No," Robert said grimly. "Phoenix is where he has assets hidden under his real identity. If he's planning to access those accounts, it means he's ready to run. We probably have less than a week before your mother loses everything and Frank disappears forever." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Robert coordinated with local police and elder protective services. Patricia and Linda helped me understand Frank's psychological manipulation tactics so I could recognize them when talking to Mom. We planned every detail of the intervention for Thursday, when Frank would be safely out of state. Meanwhile, I struggled to act normal during my daily check-ins with Mom. Each conversation revealed more evidence of Frank's control. She mentioned signing investment papers. She didn't really understand. She'd given Frank power of attorney over her medical decisions, just in case. She'd even signed a new will recently, though she was vague about the details. "Frank handles all the complicated financial stuff," she said when I gently probed. "I'm lucky to have someone so good with money looking after me." Tuesday evening, Robert called with devastating news. "I've been reviewing the property records for your mother's house. Frank filed a quitclaim deed last week transferring ownership to Madison. It's dated and notarized with your mother's signature. But she doesn't know she's signed away her house. Based on the timing, he probably presented it as insurance paperwork or estate planning. Classic misdirection. Unless we can prove the signature was obtained through fraud, that deed will hold up in court." "How do we prove fraud?" "We need your mother to testify that she didn't understand what she was signing, or we need evidence that Frank deliberately misrepresented the document. Both are difficult to establish after the fact." That night, I barely slept. Frank wasn't just stealing Mom's money, he was stealing her home, her security, her entire foundation, and she had no idea it was happening. Wednesday morning arrived gray and rainy. I parked across from Frank's house and watched him load suitcases into his Mercedes. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before, checking his phone constantly and looking around nervously. Mom stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, waving goodbye like a loving wife. She looked small and vulnerable, framed by the massive house that would soon belong to Madison, the daughter who'd convinced her that I didn't matter. As Frank drove away, I felt time running out like sand through an hourglass. This was our chance to save Mom, but it was also probably our only chance. If Frank returned from Phoenix to find his operation exposed, he had the resources and connections to disappear completely, taking Mom's stolen assets with him. Robert's final call came Wednesday evening. "Everything's in place for tomorrow. Elder Protective Services will be standing by, and we have a warrant ready if we find evidence of immediate financial abuse. But Heidi, I need you to understand something important." "What?" "Your mother might not thank you for this, at least not initially. Victims of long-term manipulation often defend their abusers even when presented with clear evidence. She might be angry with you for interfering. I know. Are you prepared for that possibility? I thought about the mother who used to make pancakes with me every Saturday, who defended me against playground bullies, who used to call me her brave girl. Then I thought about the woman who told 30 people that Madison was her only child. She's still my mother, I said finally, even if she doesn't remember that right now. Thursday morning, I drove to the house that used to be my home, carrying evidence that would either save my mother or destroy our relationship forever. Either way, the lying was finally going to stop. Thursday morning felt like the calm before a tornado. I arrived at Mom's house at 9 a.m. with Robert, Patricia, and Linda, our small convoy looking deceptively casual as we parked in the circular driveway. Robert had coordinated with Detective Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit, who waited in an unmarked car down the street with backup units ready to respond. Mom answered the door in her gardening clothes, confusion clouding her features as she recognized Patricia and Linda standing beside me. Heidi, what's going on? Who are these women? Mom, we need to talk. These are Patricia and Linda Morrison, Frank's ex-wives. The color drained from her face. I think you should leave. Frank doesn't like unannounced visitors. Frank's in Phoenix, Carol, Patricia said gently. We're here because you're in danger. For 20 minutes, we sat in the living room where I'd spent countless awkward family dinners, laying out evidence of Frank's criminal history, bank records showing the systematic theft of Mom's assets, legal documents proving he'd forged signatures, property records revealing he'd stolen her house and given it to Madison. Mom's response was exactly what Robert had predicted: denial, anger, and fierce defense of the man who'd been systematically destroying her life for 2 decades. You're lying, she said repeatedly, her voice rising toward hysteria. Frank loves me. He's taken care of me since David died. These papers, they're fake. You're trying to turn me against my husband. Mom, look at the signatures, I pleaded, pointing to the forged insurance documents. This isn't Dad's handwriting. You barely remember your father. You were 8 when he died. The words stung, but I pressed on. I remember enough to know he would never have wanted Frank to steal the money he left for my education. Frank didn't steal anything. He invested it wisely, and when you were old enough, the money went toward our family needs. What family needs Mom Frank's luxury cars, Madison's private school tuition, European vacations I was never invited on? Robert stepped in when Mom started crying, his professional training taking over. Mrs. Morrison, I'm a federal investigator. The man you know as Frank Morrison is actually Franklin Morris, wanted for fraud in 3 states. His real Social Security number doesn't match the one he's been using in Colorado. He showed her official documents, federal databases, court records spanning 2 decades. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and completely devastating to everything Mom had built her life around for 20 years. But she still wasn't ready to accept it. You're all working together, she accused, looking at us like we were strangers breaking into her home. Heidi, how could you do this to me? How could you bring these people here to destroy my marriage? I'm trying to save you, Mom. From what? From being happy, from having a family that loves me, from being robbed of everything Dad left you, everything you worked for, everything that's supposed to be yours. The intervention might have continued indefinitely, with Mom refusing to believe evidence and us unable to force her to see reason. But then Madison walked through the front door, home early from her lake house weekend, and everything changed. Madison took one look at our group and immediately understood what was happening. But instead of defending Frank like I expected, she burst into tears. Oh God, she knows, doesn't she? Madison said, looking directly at me. You found out what Dad's been doing. Mom stared at Madison in shock. Madison, honey, what are you talking about? Mom, I need to tell you something, Madison said, sitting beside her on the couch. I've known for months that something was wrong. Dad's been showing me bank statements, teaching me how to manage what he calls our family investments. But the numbers didn't make sense. Madison pulled out her phone and showed Mom screenshots of financial documents. He's been transferring money from your accounts into mine and his. He told me it was estate planning, but when I asked questions, he got angry and told me not to worry about it. That's not true. Frank wouldn't. There's more. Madison interrupted, her voice shaking. Last month, he had me sign papers to accept ownership of the house. He said it was to protect our family assets from taxes. But when I looked up the documents online, I realized he'd transferred your house to me without you knowing. Mom's world was crumbling in real time, and I found myself feeling sorry for her, despite everything she'd put me through. Madison continued her confession, revealing months of increasingly suspicious behavior from Frank. He's been giving you pills, Mom, not the vitamins he says they are. I looked them up and they're medication for anxiety and memory problems. He's been drugging you to make you more compliant. That's when Mom finally broke. Not angry tears, but deep, wrenching sobs of someone whose entire reality had just collapsed. 20 years of trust, love, and faith in a man who'd been systematically destroying her mind, her finances, and her family. Robert called Detective Chen while Mom was processing the revelation. Within an hour, the house was swarming with investigators collecting evidence and documenting the scope of Frank's fraud operation. The most shocking discovery came when they searched Frank's home office more thoroughly than I'd been able to manage. Hidden behind a false back in his filing cabinet, they found external hard drives containing surveillance footage from cameras installed throughout the house. Frank had been recording Mom's private conversations, her phone calls with friends and family, even her medical consultations. The recordings revealed something chilling. Frank hadn't just been stealing from Mom. He'd been gathering blackmail material on her friends and social circle, using their private information to target other elderly women in their community. Detective Chen played one recording that made everyone in the room sick. Frank's voice talking to an unknown associate about Mom's friend Helen, a recent widow with significant retirement savings. Carol's been talking about Helen's finances. The woman inherited nearly $500,000 from her husband's pension. She's lonely, confused about money management, perfect target. Carol can introduce me as a financial advisor. My mother had been unknowingly helping Frank identify and target other victims. The guilt on her face was heartbreaking. But the evidence also revealed something else: Frank's escape plan. Emails discussing property purchases in Mexico, offshore accounts, and fake identity documents. He wasn't planning to disappear after stealing Mom's house. He was planning to disappear that weekend. If we hadn't intervened today, your mother would have woken up Monday morning to find her husband gone and her entire life savings transferred to untraceable accounts, Detective Chen explained. As investigators worked through the evening, Mom and I sat together on the porch where Frank had made his toast just days earlier. She was struggling to process not just the betrayal, but the scope of how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. "I don't understand how I missed it," she said quietly. "I'm not stupid, Heidi. How did I not see what was happening? Because he's a professional mom. This is what he does for a living. Patricia and Linda are both intelligent women, and they went through exactly the same thing. But I turned against you. I chose him over my own daughter." The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. 20 years of damage couldn't be undone with one conversation, but for the first time in decades, my mother was really seeing me. "You were protecting Madison," I said finally. "Frank convinced you that was what a good mother does. Madison isn't even my biological daughter, and I chose her over you. How do you forgive something like that?" I looked at this woman who'd given me life, who'd loved me fiercely for the first 8 years of my existence, who'd been lost to Frank's manipulation for most of my adult life. She wasn't the enemy. She was another victim, one who'd been programmed to push away the people who might have saved her. "We figure it out together," I said, "one day at a time." Detective Chen emerged from the house with an update that changed everything. Frank Morrison, also known as Franklin Morris, and Francis Marin was arrested 2 hours ago at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, attempting to board a flight to Mexico using false identification. He was carrying multiple passports, over $50,000 in cash, and documentation showing he'd successfully transferred nearly $300,000 from your accounts to offshore holdings. Will we get the money back? Most of it, yes. Federal asset forfeiture laws allow us to recover stolen funds, especially when we can prove a pattern of criminal activity across state lines. As the investigation continued into the night, I realized this was just the beginning of a long process. Mom would need therapy to understand how she'd been manipulated. Our relationship would need time and patience to heal. Madison would have to live with the knowledge that she'd unknowingly participated in her stepfather's crimes. But for the first time in 20 years, my mother was free from Frank's control. And for the first time since I was 12 years old, there was hope that we might find our way back to each other. 6 months later, I sat in Mom's kitchen watching her make pancakes for the first time in over 20 years. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone learning to trust her own hands again. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, even though most of the furniture was the same. Frank had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for elder fraud, identity theft, and money laundering across 4 states. The investigation had uncovered 7 other victims, besides Mom Patricia and Linda, with total stolen assets exceeding $2 million. His arrest had made national news, highlighting the growing crisis of financial abuse against seniors. Blueberry or chocolate chip? Mom asked, holding up 2 packages with a tentative smile. Surprise me, I said, and was rewarded with the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her since before she married Frank. The past 6 months had been the hardest of both our lives. Mom had spent 3 months in therapy working to understand how Frank's psychological manipulation had gradually isolated her from her own judgment and relationships. The process of reclaiming her sense of self was painful and slow, complicated by the shame of realizing how completely she'd been fooled. The therapist says I was exhibiting classic signs of psychological abuse. Mom said pouring batter into the pan. Frank used something called gaslighting to make me doubt my own perceptions about you, about our family, even about my own memories. Do you remember much of how it started? Some. Frank was very subtle in the beginning. He'd make small comments about you being difficult or attention-seeking. When you'd try to talk to me about problems with Madison, he'd point out that you were an adult and should be more understanding of a little girl's needs. She flipped the pancakes with practiced ease muscle memory taking over. Over time, those small comments became my own thoughts. I started seeing your perfectly reasonable requests for attention as selfishness. I interpreted your achievements as proof that you didn't need me anymore. What about the pills? Mom's face darkened. Anti-anxiety medication that he told me was a vitamin supplement. Low doses just enough to make me more compliant and less likely to question his decisions. The doctor says it also affected my memory formation, which is why some of the past few years feel fuzzy. The medication discovery had been particularly devastating because it proved Frank's manipulation wasn't just emotional, it was chemical. He'd been deliberately altering Mom's brain chemistry to make her more susceptible to his control. Madison had moved out of the house and into a small apartment near the University of Denver, where she'd enrolled in social work classes. Her transformation had been remarkable to watch. Without Frank's influence, she'd revealed herself to be thoughtful, intelligent, and deeply remorseful about her role in our family's dysfunction. I knew something was wrong. Madison had told me during one of our awkward but increasingly comfortable coffee meetings. Dad would get angry if I asked too many questions about money, and he kept telling me that you resented us and wanted to cause trouble. I was scared to reach out to you because I thought you hated me. I never hated you, I'd assured her. I hated the situation Frank created. I'm going to pay you back, she'd said seriously. Every dollar I received from your education fund, every gift that was bought with stolen money. I don't want anything that was taken from your family. These conversations with Madison had been surprising gifts in the healing process. Without Frank's manipulation driving a wedge between us, we discovered we actually liked each other. She was funny, creative, and passionate about social justice issues. In another timeline where Frank hadn't poisoned our relationship from the start, we might have been close. "What time is Uncle Robert coming over?" Mom asked, arranging pancakes on plates with the same careful attention she used to give everything now. Around noon, he wanted to update us on the restitution process. Uncle Robert had become a regular fixture in our lives, the family member who'd been kept away by Frank's careful isolation tactics. He'd been trying to contact Mom for years, but Frank had intercepted his calls and letters, telling Mom that her deceased husband's family was trying to make claims on her assets. "I can't believe I thought David's brother was trying to steal from us," Mom said, shaking her head. "Robert loved David so much. He just wanted to stay connected to you and make sure we were okay." The doorbell rang and Mom's face lit up with the same warmth she used to show when I was little. "That's probably Patricia. She's bringing lunch from that new deli." Patricia had become one of Mom's closest friends, bonded by their shared experience of surviving Frank's manipulation. Their friendship was helping both women heal from the trauma of betrayal while providing emotional support through the ongoing legal proceedings. Linda visited frequently too, along with 2 other women from Frank's past who'd been located during the investigation. The informal support group had become a lifeline for all of Frank's victims, proof that recovery was possible and that they weren't alone in their experience. The afternoon passed quietly, filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. Uncle Robert brought photo albums from my father's family pictures I'd never seen of Dad as a young man, stories about his dreams for my future. Mom looked at them with tears in her eyes, remembering the man she'd loved before Frank convinced her to lock those memories away. "Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become," she told me, touching a photo of Dad holding me as a toddler. "He used to say you had his stubborn streak and would never let anyone push you around." "I learned that from you, too," I said. "You defended me against every bully and unfair teacher until I became the bully," she finished quietly. We'd had this conversation several times over the past months. Mom's guilt about her treatment of me was overwhelming sometimes, but her therapist had warned us both that healing wouldn't be linear. Some days were better than others. "I've been thinking about Dad's life insurance money," I said carefully, "the money Frank stole for my education." Mom tensed. We'd recovered most of her assets from Frank's hidden accounts, including the $25,000 that should have been mine. But the question of what to do with it had been hanging over us for weeks. "I know you need that money for your college loans and all the expenses you had because we didn't help you." "Actually, I want to use it for something else." I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "I want to start a nonprofit organization to help other families dealing with elder financial abuse, education support groups, legal assistance for people who can't afford to fight back." Mom stared at the preliminary paperwork with wide eyes. "You want to use your inheritance money to help strangers. I want to use it to make sure no other daughter has to go through what we went through. No other mother gets isolated and manipulated the way you were." "What would you call it?" I smiled, thinking of all the pancake breakfasts we'd shared when I was little, before Frank convinced Mom that I didn't need her anymore. "The David Miller Foundation, after Dad, who believed in protecting the people you love." Mom started crying, then the kind of tears that wash away years of accumulated pain. She held my hand across the kitchen table, her grip strong and sure for the first time in decades. "He would love that," she whispered. "He would love that you're turning something terrible into something beautiful." That evening, after everyone had gone home, Mom and I sat on the porch swing Dad had installed when I was 5. The house was officially hers again, the fraudulent property transfer reversed by court order. Frank's name had been removed from all her accounts, and Madison had voluntarily surrendered any claim to assets she'd received through his criminal activities. "I have a confession," Mom said, as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I never stopped loving you, Even when Frank convinced me that choosing you was wrong, even when I told people Madison was my only daughter, I never stopped missing the little girl who used to sit on my lap while I read stories. I never stopped missing my mom either. Can you forgive me for losing myself so completely, for letting a criminal turn me against my own daughter? I thought about the long journey that had brought us to this moment, the years of feeling unloved and unwanted, the devastating phone call that had started this whole crisis, the fear that I'd lost my mother forever to Frank's manipulation. But I also thought about the courage it had taken for Mom to face the truth about her marriage, the strength she'd shown in rebuilding her life after 20 years of psychological abuse, the way she'd fought to remember who she was before Frank convinced her to become someone else. "Mom, you didn't lose yourself," I said finally. "Frank stole you from us, but you found your way back. That's not something to be forgiven. That's something to be celebrated." We sat in comfortable silence, two women who'd survived a war against their own family and emerged stronger on the other side. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as we continued rebuilding our relationship. There would be setbacks and difficult conversations and moments when the past felt too heavy to carry. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, I was sitting beside my mother and she was choosing me. "What do you think Dad would say about all this?" I asked. Mom smiled, the expression transforming her face back into the woman I remembered from childhood. "He'd say that Miller women are fighters, and we don't give up on the people we love even when they give up on themselves. Even when it takes 20 years to win the fight, especially then." As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's refusing to let them destroy you and rebuilding something beautiful from the wreckage they leave behind. The David Miller Foundation would help hundreds of families avoid what we'd endured. Madison was becoming the sister I'd always wanted. Uncle Robert was part of our lives again, connecting us to Dad's memory and love. And Mom was learning to be herself again, free from Frank's control. Frank had tried to erase me from our family's story, but instead, his evil had created something better than what existed before. We weren't the same family we'd been when Dad was alive, but we were finally, truly a family again. Have you ever had to fight for someone you loved even when they pushed you away? I'd love to hear your thoughts on family, loyalty, and forgiveness in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding strength in the darkest moments. Share this with someone who might need to hear that sometimes love means refusing to give up even when it would be easier to walk away. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you're stronger than you know, and you deserve people in your life who choose you every single day.